Hey, howdy, hey, and welcome to Regenerative Farming News, a podcast where we talk about all things related to regenerative farming in Western Canada. Friend, I am so glad you're tuning in and spending this time with me. I just love talking about regenerative farming, hence why I started this podcast. There are so many people out here on the Canadian prairies doing amazing things with cover crops, amp grazing, and all of the regenerative principles. I am excited to tell you about them and about the bigger picture news like new projects and funding that is becoming available. I also had a last-minute unexpected change where I interviewed Kevin Elmy, the cover crop guru of Canada, about an article I found in CBC News about how farmers are struggling with the kochia problem and Kevin's solutions. If you like regenerative farming, please hit that follow button and share this show with your friends. You can also follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. Before we dig in, here's a little farm humor for you. And before we dig in, here's a little farm joke for you. Why don't horses use smartphones? Because they can't find stable Wi-Fi. Well, harvest across the Canadian prairies is almost done. In Alberta, 96% is in, with only pockets of late-seeded canola and cereals that are still out in the field. Saskatchewan is at 93%, well ahead of its 10-year average now, and Manitoba trails somewhat at 86%. I tell you what, it's always satisfying to look out over the fields and see them all done for the year. The crop is in the bins, and the geese can graze on the leftovers. The breath of relief you have after parking the combine is a big one, and it feels good. I hope that everyone had and is having a safe harvest season, and that everyone can take a well-earned break. You all deserve it. I usually do this podcast based on a script that I write out, but today I want to try something a little different and do something a little bit more off the cuff. So I'm just going to tell you about a couple of conversations that I had recently. The first conversation was much shorter, but very interesting. I was talking with somebody that I used to know growing up, and I was telling him that I had started a new podcast about regenerative farming. And his curiosity was piqued immediately. And he asked me a very interesting question. This man, he now lives in the city with his wife and kids. They have a family. And his first question, after hearing the topic of regenerative farming, which I think he was kind of somewhat familiar with, we did chat about it for a minute, but his main question was, he wanted to know how long I thought it would be until conventional chemical farming made the land unfarmable, as in wouldn't grow any more crops. Essentially, he asked me, how long do we have before everything blows up? And I was quite surprised that that was, his viewpoint, that was where he thought things were going. Because in actuality, conventional farming and even farming with, lots of tillage and chemicals, while it is damaging the soil, it doesn't mean that we have this big looming clock of, oh no, there's 10 more years until we can't farm the land anymore. That's not really how this is all working. Yes, regenerative farming is better for the land and much more long-term sustainable, but only in the way that the land will be better taken care of, not that it's going to turn into Canada into a gigantic dust bowl if we don't do it. And I thought that was really interesting that he kind of had a very, do or die outlook on it. And maybe that is also, maybe he's not the only one. Maybe people who live in the city kind of are getting this impression that if we keep farming with chemicals, we're going to kill the world, essentially. And that's really not true. And that brings me to my second conversation that I had more recently with another person that I knew growing up. Um, he is much older than me. Hey, Daryl, if you're listening. We had such a great conversation, and it was really important, I think, because one of the things he pointed out to me is that there's been a couple of terms that I think I've either misused or really either just maybe kind of given the wrong impression of. I want to start with the definitions of holistic management and regenerative farming. Because I think this is one area where I have definitely made a mistake and we need to sort this out a little bit. And when you hear the definitions of holistic and regenerative side by side, they really sound extremely similar to the point where it's understandable that they can probably often be confused for the same thing. But let me tell you how they actually are a bit different, and that regenerative kind of fits into the holistic approach to farming. So I'm just going to read something that I have found here on the Savory Institute, which you remember on my first episode, I talked about Alan Savory and his TED Talk about the desertification that is happening around the world. But his approach and his institute, the Savory Institute, is who originally created and invented holistic management. So the Savory Institute says holistic land management mimics nature's symbiotic relationships, optimizing the whole system and balancing. This is where it gets different. Holistic management balances environmental, financial, and social well-being. So if you hear those words, as opposed to regenerative farming, let's do a little comparison. So holistic is balancing the environmental, financial, and social well-being. Regenerative farming is just about the 5 soil health principles, right? So that falls under the environmental part of the holistic management. So holistic really looks at the bigger picture of, yes, the soil health and the environmental, but holistic also takes into account the financial aspects of the farm and the social well-being of the farm. So it's just holistic is a much bigger picture. Regenerative farming fits underneath it into the environmental aspect. So I think, I was kind of using both of those terms interchangeably, and I shouldn't have been. That's my bad. They are very similar. They do kind of talk about the same things. And even some farmers that I had just talked to in real life had told me that they thought those terms also were simply interchangeable, that regenerative was like the new term replacing holistic. But in fact, that is not true. So I just wanted to clarify those two terms. And then also one more thing I wanted to talk about that I've maybe kind of been misusing potentially is the term desertification. Let's dig into that one a little bit, because I think it's really important that we understand what desertification is and that it's not something we can't come back from. Like, if people in the city are thinking, oh no, we're using too many chemicals on the farm, we are turning the world into a desert, and then they have this apocalyptic viewpoint of, oh no, something's going to hit the fan, at one point, and that's it. It's going to be over. But this is not true. So let me tell you what desertification really means and how it's actually not a dead-end road. Okay, so let's start with, what is the definition of desertification? And Google says, the desertification is the degradation of fertile land into unproductive, desert-like landscapes, happening in arid, semi-arid, and dry, subhumid areas. Okay, so that part is really key. Let me tell you about how this applies to Canada. Okay, so the arid, semi-arid areas are where desertification happens. If an area gets enough rainfall, then desertification isn't even going to happen in that area. The rainfall accumulation will help plants grow. Even if it's farmed, it won't be able to desertify because of how quickly things will come back. When farmers say that rain makes all the difference, they're not entirely wrong. Okay, now I do believe that farmers use rainfall as a bit of a crutch when it comes to holding themselves back from regenerative farming, saying we don't get enough rain, so we can't do it. That's very not true. But that is a different topic for another day. Right now, desertification only happens when there is kind of desert-like conditions to begin with already that farming can then exacerbate. So, what I have to do is apologize because when I have said on this podcast in the past that we are desertifying the land in Canada by farming it conventionally and chemically, that is not an accurate statement because not all of the land in Canada is arid, semi-arid, or can even be desertified. Desertified? Whatever. So, the areas where this does happen is in those semi-arid pockets. Particularly, that'll be where Calvin Gaviline farms in southwestern Saskatchewan and where I used to farm in southeastern Alberta. That is a pocket known as Palliser's Triangle. It is known for extremely low rainfall amounts and is classified as semi-arid. So in areas like that, chemical farming is having a different impact on the soil. Is it turning it into a desert landscape? No, not really. That goes back again to that other conversation I had with the city friend who thought that we were going to blow up the world with chemical farming. We're not. We're not going to blow up the world if we keep chemical farming. Life will go on. Farming will go on. It's not that bad. However, it's just not good, and it's not the best. Regenerative principles are the solution, not only for having a better longer-term outlook, but it's just better for everybody all around. Is there a place for chemicals in farming? I suppose. My own personal opinion is that I wish there wasn't any. It would be nice to know that none of the food grown has glyphosate on it. However, that gets into the whole thing of idealism versus reality. We can have these rosy-eyed glasses on, which, I'll admit, I love to wear them. I love to look at farming and go, what if it could be awesome and perfect? I'm a very passionate person. I have always been a very passionate person when it comes to the things I believe in, and probably sometimes I take it too far. I know that I do. That's just me. So I'll have to learn how to, make sure that I don't bring those rosy-eye glasses onto the podcast too much. We can't live in a perfect world. But what makes me so excited about regenerative farming is that those rosy-eyed glasses are not super far from what can actually be. I've often, especially back when I was farming, was so frustrated that it just seemed so hard. I saw the stress of what farming can put people through, experienced it firsthand, saw it firsthand on the other people that I farmed with. It is a very stressful living. And I just often found myself wishing, man, why can't this be better? Why can't this be easier? It feels like it's harder than it should be. And then after 15 years of doing it that way, and generations really, because we were the third generation on that farm, I finally found regenerative farming. First organic, which is its whole different thing and has an interesting place in farming. Organic does tend to incorporate a lot of tillage, which is not great, but it does get rid of the chemicals. But organic farming is very difficult to transition to. I don't feel organic farming was a great solution because it's just too black and white. Whereas regenerative farming It's just so versatile. It opens up so many doors. A farmer doesn't have to be certified in order to prove that they are doing regenerative farming. With organic, you have to do all this paperwork and show that you're not using any chemicals and you've got barriers between your land and non-organic land and blah, blah, blah. And it's good. Don't get me wrong. Organic farming can be great. I am a fan of organic farming, but I just feel like this regenerative movement that we're seeing happen here in Canada, it just has so many more options for farmers to take and fit onto their farm, which fits back into the holistic management, is that you have to look at your entire farm with you, the soil, the animals, the environment. You have to look at everything in a big picture way. Holistically, that's what holistic farming is looking at everything in the big picture way. What is best for every aspect of the farm? For the human, the farmer, for the finances, for the land, the soil, the animals. What's best for everything? And then regenerative principles just work so well into that. So really, to put it succinctly, holistic management is looking at each farm individually and saying, what is best for this entire farm, including the people, the land, and the animals that are on this farm? What is best for you? Not your neighbors, not anybody else. What's best for your farm? And then regenerative principles help you build what is best for your farm. And I guess if I have anything else that I maybe should apologize for, it could be that maybe sometimes I make it sound like this whole regenerative farming thing is just a bit of a pie in the sky kind of ideal where it's like nothing can go wrong. Try these principles. It's all great. Everything will be good and better if you do farming this way. And, that just maybe gives a wrong impression that nothing can go wrong with regenerative farming. And we all know that's not true. Of course things can go wrong. Mistakes can be made. A cover crop can be terminated too late and uses up more moisture than you should have let it. Things can happen and go wrong with anything. This is not a perfect world. Regenerative farming is not going to make your farm perfect. But, I still hold on to the belief that regenerative farming principles can and will make a difference, a positive impact on any farm that they are used on. It may come with a bit of a roller coaster and it may not be perfect. Some farmers have had incredible luck. Like when I talked to Calvin Gaviline, he didn't seem to ever say that he had had much of a downfall. He simply started with some cover crops and it just went great from there. It just went up from when he tried that first year, his first cover crop. But, not everybody's experience is the same. And if there's any farmers out there listening who are thinking about doing this, and you're like, yeah, well, but will it work out so good for me? Well, maybe it won't. Maybe it won't. But I can pretty confidently say that if you try the regenerative principles and if you go at it with some good guidance from farmers who have already done it, who are already here in Canada doing it, proving that it works everywhere, well, then I think you have a pretty incredible chance of success right off the get-go. I think anybody can see a good positive difference from using regenerative principles right from step one. Now, it's just not guaranteed. Like anything in life, it's just not a guarantee. And what I'd really like to end this segment with is just a little reminder that it also doesn't have to be all or nothing. I do believe that regenerative farming principles can, in a way, quote, save the world, but it doesn't have to be that every farm has to do 100% of it tomorrow. We can start making these differences a little bit at a time. And my friend Daryl, he told me something that I thought was a great way to put this. He said to picture an empty pool, and if we each put in a drop, eventually we fill the pool. Daryl told me that he heard that from the Roots and Refuge YouTube channel about regenerative farming. So there you go. We don't have to solve all of this overnight. We don't have to have every acre doing 100% regenerative principles. But it's definitely, in my opinion, it's the direction that not only are we going to go simply because it's better, it's the direction we have to go for all of us. Regenerative farming is the direction that we have to go if we want to have healthier and happier soil, healthier and happier farms, healthier and happier people. I had a great conversation with Mr. Kevin Elmy about a CBC article that talked about an interview they did with a farmer dealing with the problem of kochia and what a widespread problem this is for farmers across the Canadian prairies. Kevin and I had a fantastic conversation about this. In case you don't remember Kevin Elmy from the last time he was on the podcast, he is a longtime regenerative agriculture educator, consultant, and seed grower. He's the founder of Cover Crops Canada and has spent decades helping farmers across the prairies design crop rotations, build soil health, and rethink how we manage diversity on the land. This is Kevin's second time on the show, and as always, he brings a wealth of practical experience and insight into our conversation. Hi, Kevin. So great to have you back to the podcast again today. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about this news article I found about kochia just becoming a bigger and bigger problem for the Canadian farmers here on the prairies. I was hoping you could give us some insight and tell us, what is kochia telling us about the state of our soil health, and what can we do about it?
Oh, thanks for the invite. Always great talking with you. When we start looking at these weeds are, when we look at what an actual weed is, any plant is a weed, just growing in the place we don't want them. And when we look at a weed like kochia, it has an ecological advantage over other plants that triggers it to grow. And in the case of kochia, that is indicating that our soils have a low available calcium. On a soil test, it may show that we have 6,000 pounds, but how much of that is actually available to that plant, available to the microbes in the soil? The other thing that it shows is we have a high soil nitrate, so we have excess soil nitrates in the soil. We have a high sodium in our soil. And when our soils have those conditions, that gives our plant, these weeds, the ecological advantage and become stronger and stronger. Because nature is much smarter than what we are, we'll go in using the same management that created the problem that we have. We try doing a patch of using more chemicals, more tillage, more of the problems of what created the problem. And nature has the diversity within that weed or other plants that are similar that have the same ecological advantage to get stronger. It develops herbicide resistance. It has, once we have this pattern of especially with a very simplified rotation where the timing is all the same, nature then adjusts their flowering, their seed set, their growth periods to produce seed in those times that are opportunistic for them. So it's going to be avoiding the herbicide window. So they're going to germinate maybe a little bit later in the season. They're going to have early seed set, so it's going to drop seeds earlier before we harvest. So nature has that intelligence to have something growing. And the thing that we always have to think about is these weeds aren't just growing willy-nilly, they're getting triggered to grow. And what's happening is the whole thought process behind it is these plants are trying to fix our soil. So because the kochia is going to be able to grow in soils with a low calcium flux, higher nitrates, and high sodium, what it's going to do is drive down the tap root, open the soil up, improve the drainage. It's going to take up some of that excess sodium and tie it up in its plant tissue. It's going to tie up that free nitrate and convert it over to amino acids and proteins and other nitrogen containing nutrients within that plant. And it's trying to free up extra calcium in the system. When we go in and we kill that kochia without doing any other changes to our system, what's happening is we're not allowing those weeds to fix that soil. So then that problem just gets bigger and bigger. So we have to take a look to see how, number one, how do we increase their calcium flux in our soil? How do we reduce the free excess soil nitrates in our system? How do we get rid of some of that sodium? And what plants can we grow that will replace the function of kochia? And this way the kochia doesn't get triggered to grow. And how do we in the future change our management so that we aren't producing those low calcium flux, high nitrate, soil nitrates soils, and with this the sodium issue. And when we look at the whole function in our soil, number one, what we need to do is to stop evaporation. Evaporation brings up water. The water evaporates at the soil surface, and what gets left? The minerals, which in this case is going to be a lot of salt. So that's going to be the first step. Stop the evaporation, and we need to have some taproot growing to get down to use that water at a lower depth in that soil, so that this way it's going to be able to leach some of that sodium down. It's going to have the continuous growing plant, going to tie up that excess soil nitrates. And if it's mycorrhizal, it's going to help bring up calcium from depth and bring it up to the surface, get that mycorrhizae, get that soil aggregate stability in our soils. And we've now replaced the need for kochia to grow in those soils.
Oh, that is so fascinating. So let me just see if I can kind of go back and summarize some of those key points so I can, understand this on a basic level here. So there's excess nitrates. There's too much of those.
Soil nitrates.
Yeah. And we don't have enough available calcium. Is that right?
Yes.
And so what we need to do is fix those factors.
Yes. And when we have that taproot going in and we have good soil structure, we get good water infiltration. Now any of that sodium, which is when we start increasing the calcium in that soil, it's going to start knocking off that sodium. So it's going to be in the water solution, the soil solution. And when we have good infiltration in the soil and deep infiltration, it'll wash those sodium molecules deep into that soil profile. So then you can start growing crops again.
So when we're talking about taproots, and basically we need to do what the kochia is trying to do, we need to do it instead of letting the kochia be there. So are we talking about putting in say alfalfa or other taproots? What's a solution farmers could look towards?
Oh, and that's once again, what are the goals? Ideally, the lifespan of kochia seeds in the soil is really relatively short. Some of the research is suggesting that after 3 years of no kochia growing, the seed becomes non-viable. So in these situations, if there is the opportunity to seed down a perennial for that magical 3 to 5 years, that would be one of the best ways of doing it. So this is going to be, checking off a lot of the boxes in the soil health principles. So this way we can have the control. We have the options for cultural control instead of chemical. And we can go through and really start doing some major changes in our soil. Then we're looking at monocrops when we start talking about annual cropping, when we start talking, those are the things that we're doing to increase the kochia populations. So we need to do the opposite of those annual short-term crops and get into either biennials or short-term perennials to get things going. And one of the opportunities is for someone that is into grain production and not interested in livestock or producing hay is doing some forage seed production.
Oh, okay. So alfalfa, but growing it for alfalfa seed.
Alfalfa seed, sweet clover seed,
Mhm.
tall fescue, durian wild rye, slender wheatgrass. There's a lot of salt tolerant species out there that we can be using to create that cover, still create cash flow for someone that is interested in grain production.
Okay, yeah. So there's options. It doesn't have to be in a grass or alfalfa mix per se.
It doesn't have to be livestock, a direct livestock market per se.
Hmm.
But when we do the seed production, it's going to be doing a lot of those things that we want to do. We can still go in and do some chemical treatments in the early stages of the production. But as we get through and we start creating a stronger soil aggregation, we get a good transpiration system going in instead of evaporative system. All of a sudden, our soils start healing themselves and going the right direction. The problem is once we've identified an area as being the potential for being saline, it always has the potential going back to becoming saline again.
Hmm. Yeah, that
So
was going to be my next question was like, say a farmer did that for 3 years and the kochia went away. Is there like soil testing or something that that farmer could then do that would tell them where it's at and if it's at a safe enough level to go back into grain farming for a few years?
So what I do is when I'm feeding some cover crops and so if someone had a very salty area or field, what I would do is I would do a very fairly diverse mix of a cover crop, and I would use some species like Phacelia, which is not very saline tolerant, and get the producer to go out and find out where that Phacelia is growing. So where the Phacelia is growing, that area is probably going to be all right to grow some less salt tolerant species.
Hmm.
And so if it's not if that Phacelia is not growing in a lot of places, I would do another year of remediation of cover crops and increasing that soil health, not jumping back into traditional cropping.
Ah,
On
okay.
the flip
So
side,
yeah, doing a whole test
uh,
year. Yeah, just using plants to see what the results are.
biofeedback. And
I
that's
see.
where, if someone wanted to, the Chinook Applied Research Association Soil Health Lab in Oyen, that's a great place to start to get some baselines to find out where, and once again, I wouldn't do a composite soil sample. I would grab some specific soil samples from specific spots in the field. So then we can monitor where your salinity is, where your free nitrates are, where your available calcium is, to
Okay.
find out where this risk is. There is a company that has just started up out of Vancouver that is actually working on this type of consulting, where they're doing the uh, the predictive weed maps and they're going through and looking at soil tests. They're doing, a lot of this work, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this works in the future.
That is fascinating. I didn't realize that that anybody was even working on predicting weeds. It kind of felt like we were still playing catch up in that respect. That's fascinating. Can you
Oh,
tell me more about
absolutely.
that, or should I just go? Is that maybe something I need to research for another episode?
I can send you some information on it, and then this way you can have more questions, and if
Okay.
you want to talk to the owner, I can get you in contact with them too. But
Okay.
it's the whole thing of when we start looking at most farms, I feel in a lot of cases they're relying too much on their agronomists to go out and look at the fields. The one of the best lines I've heard, and I don't know who said it, but the best thing you can put onto any of your land is your shadow. You be out the field, you monitor, and this is what I'm training the people I work with is, okay, so where is that facility growing in the field? That's forcing them to go out and take a look to see, okay, no, it's just on the hills and the flats. There's nothing, or it's growing everywhere but here. Okay, so now they're understanding their own fields a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just having, more of a microscope, magnifying glass on your own fields and taking a deeper look at that.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. It sounds like there's really some good solutions out there for farmers who are dealing with kochia. And I think farmers who are dealing with it's pretty much maybe not all of them, but most farmers definitely do. So if they have a
Well,
field
I'm
that's
working with
particularly bad about it, there's some options they can look at for rotating out of monocrops, and it can stop the kochia. Is that accurate to say?
there's one of the colonies over at Bigger, Saskatchewan. I've been working with, and he said by changing management, by doing some milkway, putting the milkway into the soil to create that calcium source, putting down some humates, all of those, the change of management, and then using a lot of the tap roots, lots of diversity, biennial plants. They've noticed a huge reduction in the amount of kochia on their farm. And then we get a hot, dry summer, and our plants aren't growing quite as well. And they had a little bit of a spike on their kochia plants this year. But I said, just keep the steady helm, move forward. We're doing changes, and as we do changes, we created these problems over the last 20 years, and we can't fix them in one.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I always love thinking of the line where it says progress is not linear. There's always the ups and downs with everything. We're not aiming for perfection. And you have to ride the highs and lows. That's fascinating that they're putting, did you said milkway? Because when you first told me about the lack of calcium, my very first thought went to, oh, well, milk is high in calcium. But
absolutely.
I suppose you have to have access to that.
Milk, and that's one of the problems. So working with Paul Carnuglian over Birch Hills. He was over quota on his milk production, and he asked, what do I do with it? And I said, spread your milk on your land. And, the negative is that it's really high in sugar. So you have to watch how much milk or milkway you're putting down because of that sugar load, because if you get a spike in your bacteria levels, which is going to cycle more nutrients, which will decrease your fungal to bacterial ratio, which will trigger more weeds because it creates more nitrate. But the milkway, the negative potentially there is maybe bringing in too much salt. So you have to kind of watch that. But if you're using skim milk powder, if you're using, any of these milk products, and if the milk products aren't available, what I've been suggesting to people is using alfalfa pellets. Just regular feed pellets. Because when you look at what is in an alfalfa pellet, the number one ingredient is going to be carbon. And then you start working down the list of things, but your calcium levels are going to be really high in that too. So that this way, it's one of the in quotes organic sources of nutrition that when we just add elemental calcium of some sort, one of the things we have to watch is the interaction with that calcium with other nutrition in the soil, particularly your zinc and your phosphate. So there's a nice little diagram called the Mulder cycle, MULDER, and it shows when you add one nutrient what it does to other nutrients. And calcium is one of the party animals where it really interferes with a lot of other nutrients in the soil. So if we can put down our calcium with a carbon source, a carbon bind calcium, this way it goes into the soil. It's already in a usable form for the microbes, which is going to be usable for the plants.
Oh, that's
Put
fascinating.
down you put down gypsum. Now that has to go through the biology. It has to go through the soil chemistry and biology before the plants can get to it. And that's where it kind of can mess things up. Using a little bit, that'll work. Adding the carbon plus your nutrition. And once again, as carbon-based beings, you and I, anytime we are consuming nutrition, it usually has a carbon molecule attached to it, because
Okay.
that's the most efficient way our body could utilize it.
Okay. That's so fascinating. I find it so interesting that not only can the alfalfa plant growing in the soil fix this problem, help fix this problem, but even using the alfalfa plant in the pellet form gives the nutrition needed into the soil that can also
Yeah,
help the kochia not grow there because it's not needed anymore.
absolutely. And once again, it all goes back to we need a vegetative plant growing because our soils are lacking in liquid carbon.
Hmm.
And with the plants, how it gets into the soil, the liquid carbon, is through root exudate.
Hmm.
And we get a root exudate by having a plant in that vegetative stage. And there's way too many of the fields out there that do not have a vegetative plant growing in the last, from the middle of June right up until freeze up. And that's one of the crucial times that we need to change in agriculture. We need that green plant growing in at the end of the season. It is crucial for building soil health. And when we build that soil health, now we're tying up the nitrate, we're building more mycorrhizae, so we're going to make more calcium available. It just makes that system work. And when people say I'm too dry, well, we're not talking about having a pure mat out there. All we need is, one plant per square foot or one per 2 square feet to make the system function properly.
Oh, interesting. It can be that sparse and still have the impact that's needed.
And what I recommend to people is if they have a pail, fill it full of soil, and put one seed of winter wheat or winter triticale or some biennial plant in there, grass, let it grow for 2 months, and then get a garden hose and slowly wash the soil out of the bucket. So this way we keep that root intact.
Hmm.
And what you'll find is with our annual crops, our root to shoot ratio is really quite low. When we deal with the biennial, our root to shoot ratio, so the amount of root versus how much shoot we have,
Hmm.
is just astronomically higher. So we get way
Oh,
more root system. So if you grow a wheat plant in one bucket and a winter wheat plant in a different bucket, wash the soils out after 30 days or 60 days,
mhm.
it's amazing the difference between the rooting systems between those two different plants.
So another thing farmers could be doing to counteract the kochia problem is very lightly, in what crops are possible, very lightly adding a winter wheat somewhere in the seed. Like when they're seeding their crop, they could maybe add winter wheat in there. Is that
Mhm.
accurate?
Yes, and when we have that green plant growing when it's dry, and we've proved this south of Swift Current with Galvin,
Hmm.
that all of a sudden it's competition is what everybody says, but what happens is we start fixing the micro water cycle. And this is some work that Walter Yene from Australia has shown, is when we have a green plant and growing in with something that is in the reproductive stage, so it has a stem and starting to mature, that green plant growing under the canopy will cool down quicker than the air around it. So then the water will condense on that leaf underneath that cash crop and actually put more water into the soil than having bare ground.
Oh my goodness. It even helps keep the water. It's a little water collector down underneath the canopy of the cash crop. That is so cool. Man, I thought we were going to have like a quick little, 10, 15-minute conversation about this. Ah,
And I've been
it's so much
chatting.
more
There's
interesting. Oh, yeah.
absolutely. There's another researcher that I've been in touch with through Farming Revolution, Phil Mulvey, and another Aussie. and he's done a lot of research on the same sort of thing, and he wrote a great book on the effect of the rabbit fences in Australia,
Mm.
and where they keep the rabbits out, they have a lot more green growth, and guess where the water is falling, where there's green plants. When we don't have the green plants, we're not getting that that water cycle.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm not surprised at all. I've never heard of what a rabbit fence is before. So now I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna have to go Google
There's
that and
another
educate
rabbit hole,
myself.
dude.
Yeah, it's another rabbit hole,
So
literally.
so in Australia, they have rabbits are a huge problem for them, so they have these rabbit-proof fences to keep them, relatively contained.
Hmm.
And where the rabbits are, they do some huge damage. If you think our gophers are bad, the rabbits are are much worse. So, and of course, introduced when the European settlers moved to Australia, they hunt rabbits, so they brought rabbits over. Well, they got out of control, so then they brought foxes. So then the foxes got out of control. Uh, Another example of how humans screw things up.
Oh goodness, it reminds me of that book when I was a child of the woman who ate a fly, and then you just keep adding the next thing and the
Exactly.
next thing. Oh goodness, that's kind of funny. Yeah, the gophers on the prairies are terrible. I can't imagine an animal that's gotten even worse than that. It's can be pretty catastrophic. In fact, that's another big
Oh,
problem that farmers are dealing with. I don't know. I have not delved down into how regenerative farming could help that, but I feel like that's a conversation for another day anyway. Um,
well, I wrote an article in Grain News about 10, 15 years ago, and last winter someone phoned me up and said, I was reading your article about gopher control. I said, ooh, they digging deep in that one.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's funny how that stuff, once you put it out there and it's out on the internet, as long as it's still out there somewhere, anybody can still go and find it. So,
Absolutely. And once again, I look at once again, the gophers are a symptom. What is the cause of why are the gophers there?
mhm.
And once we start looking at that, now we can actually come up with a solution for control instead of, okay, we poisoned them. Okay, so what did that do? Well, they came back. Well, yeah, guess what? That's going to work. That they are going to come back because we haven't fixed why they're. And this is that whole thing of agriculture of when we have these problems, what's the cause of it? The,
Mm,
the, the disease, the insects, the whatever, that is the symptom. Why?
mhm.
We have to go back to that why thing. And once we figured out the why, now there's some things that we can do to alleviate the problem.
Yeah, you can't have a permanent solution for something when you're always just trying to fix a temporary problem.
Absolutely. And that's, I make the joke about, went to the doctor and I said, doctor, it hurts when I touch my head and it hurts when I touch my ribs. It hurts when I touch my knee. What's wrong with me? The doctor said, well, you have a broken finger.
Yes. Yeah, we've got to find the broken finger. And when it comes to kochia, the broken finger is the excess nitrate, the lack of available calcium, and I don't know, was
And
there a
excess
third thing? Is it
sodium.
basically those
Yeah,
two?
it's sodium,
And
excess
sodium.
sodium in the system.
Right. And the
And
sodium.
so we need to tie that up. And so using some humates in there, okay, yeah, that can be a temporary fix. But if we're still evaporating water, we're still going to be having that problem. It drives me nuts when people say on Facebook when they start talking about salinity and someone says add manure. No, manure will not potentially fix the problem. It may make the system work because if the manure is high in sodium, you're bringing more sodium in. If you're
Mhm.
coming in with a high nitrogen source, you're bringing in more nitrate and excess nitrogen. That soil needs to balance its carbon nitrogen ratio. So if you add more nitrogen, too much nitrogen, the microbes are going to eat the soil organic matter, which is going to reduce the amount of aggregation, which is going to cause. So these are the things we have to be thinking about. We have to know what we're doing instead of saying, my buddy said that he heard that someone said that adding manure works. It can, but what were the circumstances of how it what was type of manure, what was the testing, how
Mhm.
bad was the soil, what else did they do to make it work instead of, oh, this is the one step I did and it fixes everything.
Right. We need to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges.
Systems approach.
Mhm.
Systems approach is the way that we solve problems long term. Doing silver bullets, unless you're dealing with vampires or werewolves. Okay, yeah, that's going to be the way that we do it. Fine, but when we start dealing with systems approach of some of these agricultural problems, we have to take a look at the symptoms versus causes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. One more last quick question here before I let you go. Um, the one farmer who was interviewed by the CBC, he said that ultimately, if they don't get a handle on the kochia, he says that it could reduce their ability for their farm to turn a profit. I mean, it already is, but this is his quote. It could reduce the ability for our farm to turn a profit, reduce our ability to continue to do this. That says to me, like, what I get from that is that they see kochia as something that could ultimately cost them their ability to farm, to make it not profitable if they don't find a solution. Do you think that farming with chemicals and monocropping, the way that they're trying to approach kochia right now, is it going to solve the kochia problem, or is it just going to make it worse?
Yeah, the definition of insanity is keep doing something over and over again, expect a different outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have a problem and our past management has created this problem, continuing on with the same management isn't going to fix it. To look for that one step, we have to take a look of why. Why is this kochia getting worse? Okay, let's grab soil tests. Let's grab what are we growing? Let's take a look at our production model and what can we do to change in our model? Is it especially if you understand the soil health principles, okay, so do we have a green growing plant in the soil? Okay, so yes or no. Are we reducing tillage? So in most cases, a lot of producers are min till or zero till. So okay, so we check that box. Are we really reducing reliance on synthetics? No, we're going the wrong way. Are we increasing plant diversity? No, we're going monocrops. We're going tighter rotations. Do we have livestock integration? No. So in a lot of cases, okay, so what can we do? Okay, so I don't want livestock. Okay, I can live with that. But how do we get a green plant growing? How do we get more plant diversity? How do we get, those are the steps that we have to be taking. And then, that reliance on synthetics, that's both fertilizer, fungicides, and insecticides. How do we get away from that? And it's going back to, okay, so what are some biological inputs that we can use that won't mess up our soil chemistry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's going to be a really big thing for farmers to face, is that they are going to have to find different ways to approach this than the monocropping input solutions that they've been trying to use. They're going to have to mentally come to that place where they can say, these haven't been working. We need to try something different. And yeah, I'm excited to put out this podcast here with your awesome solutions. We can maybe spread the word and help farmers deal with the kochia problem. Thank you so much for being on the show, Kevin. I really appreciate your time.
If you would like to connect with Kevin yourself and have a chat about what he can help you do with your weeds on your farm, you can find his information on his website, covercrops.ca. Well, I dream of the day when I can one day maybe get paid with this podcast to go and cover events out in the field. But until then, I'm just going to keep telling you guys about these awesome upcoming events. If you're listening to this podcast before the 15th, there's a day in the field, Grazing, Grains, and Growth in Manville, Alberta. It's hosted by Rural Roots to Climate Solutions, and the field day will spotlight regenerative farming and feed on a tour of Will Groenveld's fields, talking about soil health and crop livestock integration. And then later in November, we have the Manitoba Forage and Growers Association Regenerative Agriculture Conference. It'll be in Brandon, Manitoba. It's a 1.5-day event with some great speakers lined up for that. And then later on in February of 2026, the Holistic Management Canada Conference will be in Taber, Alberta, bringing together land managers, families, and community initiatives for regenerative networking. Well, that's everything I have for you this week. So if you're a farmer out there who's struggling with kochia or looking for different and better ways to be dealing with the weeds on your farm, then this is your reminder that the weeds are not the problem, they are the symptom. And if you look at the symptoms to find what the real problem is going on down in your soil, you can fix what's the real problem and get kochia to go away for good. Or at the very least, get it under control so that you don't have to be wondering, is this weed going to take over my whole farm one day and make it so that I can't make a living? No, there are solutions. We just have to try something that we haven't tried before. And that's looking down at our soil health and fixing the problem that's under and in the ground. This is Heather Heinrichs signing off. Together, we can grow healthier soil, stronger farms, and a more resilient future.